Notre Dame plays Navy tomorrow, which means it's time to revisit one of the most contentious debates among the Notre Dame fan base. Should the Irish continue to play Navy on an annual basis? All that and more in today's mailbag edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And happy Friday, everybody, and thanks for joining me here on Friday, October 25th, by making this your first listen of the day. For those of you watching along on YouTube, I would really appreciate it if you took a quick second to like the video below and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Or if you're on the go and you're listening to the podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred platform. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right. The everyday listeners know that Friday episodes are reserved for the mailbag, and we got another great one on tap for you today. Thank you to everybody who sent yours in. I got some good ones about Mitchell Evans' future, where things stand with the quarterback position as it relates to next year, plus some good high school football talk at the end that I'm really excited about. But let's start with some questions about the Navy game. The Irish play the Navy midshipmen tomorrow in MetLife Stadium, and I actually released my full preview for that game on Wednesday of this week. So if you really want to dive into that matchup and you have not listened to that one yet, go check that out once you're done here, because today is going to be focused less on the game that will be played tomorrow and more about the rivalry in general. Because when I posted about the mailbag on social media, I also asked what you think about the Navy rivalry. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Or are you indifferent? Because I think the series has become a pretty polarizing topic amongst Notre Dame fans, and I want to go over some of the different arguments for and against it today, and then I'll get into how I feel about the Navy series. And here's what you had to say. Here were some of the responses that I got. This one from Zinir A5, who just said, tradition. All right, straight to the point. Luke Smith says, stinks, not good. Saul Cortez 20 said, living history and becomes interesting every so often like this year. That's pretty true, I guess. Sydney Ruth Mulvenon said, this is the toughest matchup in college football. Sydney, I don't know about all that. I'm going to call cap on that one, but I appreciate your input here. Connor Cross 17 says, is the Navy series still important? It's so lopsided and Notre Dame should drop them. So Connor Cross is calling for the end of this rivalry. Micah 7405 says, how worried are you about injuries in this game? Because with all the injuries that happened on that terrible field, it makes me scared of Jeremiah Love and Riley Leonard getting hurt. Not to mention the history of injuries playing Navy. Brian Doors, 6483, said Notre Dame would not be here if not for Navy. I'm going to address that. Jonathan Payne said Navy series is fine if that's the only military team Notre Dame plays, but how are they going to improve the strength of schedule moving forward? That's fair. Bob Feeney asked how many Navy players would start at Notre Dame or even be on scholarship. So as you can see, it's a pretty mixed bag, and I'm going to get into some of those questions in a second. But I want to hit a couple things first that I think are important. Number one, what Brian D said, Notre Dame would not be here if not for Navy. That's probably true. Let's go through some of the history, because I feel like whenever you have this conversation, people always say, learn your history. So let's talk about that history so it's very clear we are all on the same page. Let's go back to 1942. Notre Dame was in a terrible spot financially during World War II. Enrollment had fallen by about 20% compared to what it was before the war, and the student body consisted mostly of freshmen who were too young to be drafted or a lot of students who were physically disabled. And at the same time, the Navy was low on men because they were basically fighting two wars at once. You've got the war on the Far East against the Germans, and then in the Pacific against Japan after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So Notre Dame's president at the time, Reverend Hugh O'Donnell, came up with a plan and reached out to the U.S. military, invited both the Army and the Navy to use the university's grounds for training, but only the Navy accepted. Then, in April of 1942, Notre Dame became one of the hosts of Navy's V7 program, which was basically like a volunteer training program that was meant to rapidly prepare young officers to be ready to enter the war, because the Navy was so short on men, and they really needed to accelerate that training so that these men were ready to fight in the U.S. Navy. The midshipmen were there for about 4 months, and they stayed in 4 dorms that still exist today, like Morrissey, Lyons, Howard, and Baden Hall. And according to Andrew McDonough, the Navy paid Notre Dame over $487,000, which is roughly $8 million, probably a little bit north of that today, for allowing them to use their facilities. The next year, the Navy expanded its presence on Notre Dame's campus by establishing the V12 program, and the men who enrolled were also offered the opportunity to take undergraduate classes at Notre Dame and all the other host schools. Notre Dame was not the only host university. There were some schools around the Northeast as well. They were all taking part in this initiative. Meanwhile, as all of this is going down, Frank Leahy and the Irish football team were on their way to winning another national championship in 1943. But after that season, Leahy and his staff volunteered to join active duty, and many of the young officers who trained on Notre Dame's campus as well. So they were all kind of going into the war together, and it was a very mutually beneficial partnership. The money that Navy gave Notre Dame prevented the university from going into financial ruin, and the facilities and the men that Notre Dame provided Navy was a huge help for their fight in the war. As a result, Notre Dame has played Navy in football every year since. I believe Father Hesburgh even called the Navy Notre Dame's best friends at the time, and it's undeniable, right? Navy really helped Notre Dame get through the war, but Notre Dame also helped them, and it is a great story, and I really appreciate the shared history between the two institutions. I think it's great, especially when these teams play each other, and after the game, Notre Dame's players go stand behind the Naval Academy's players, and they listen to the alma mater. That was actually started by Charlie Weiss, and I believe that the bond between the two programs is strong. But now we have to look at the reality of the situation and just reassess how things are in today's college football landscape, because I believe that now the rivalry has become a hindrance to the football program, the Notre Dame football program. As Micah pointed out about the injuries, this has been an issue when Notre Dame plays Navy. A lot of Irish players get hurt because of the way that Navy cut blocks. Now, it has gotten better in recent years because just a few years ago, cut blocking was legal within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. They have cut down on that, but let's go back at some of the recent history between the two schools. Joe Schmidt, Notre Dame's starting middle linebacker in 2014. He got hurt against Navy, got cut right in the knee. He missed the rest of the season, and the Notre Dame defense cratered. They did not have a lot of depth, and it looked like Joe Schmidt, despite people might not always love his athleticism or lack thereof, he was a coach on the field, got everyone in the right place at the right time, and once he went out, that defense was not anywhere near as good without him on the field the rest of the year. It's a big reason why they struggled so much in the month of November of that season. Kona Schwenke also got hurt against Navy. Wojciak Williams tore his ACL against the midshipmen around that same time. Sheldon Day, one of Notre Dame's better defensive linemen, also re-aggravated a previous injury and missed significant time after playing Navy. Drew Tranquil went down with a knee injury against Navy in 2018, but fortunately it ended up not being as severe as it looked, and good for Drew Tranquil because he did not have a lot of luck when it came to knee injuries in his college career. And as I said, it has been better in recent years, but there's also a Navy hangover. The week after Notre Dame plays Navy, they have struggled in the past because they basically have to prepare for a completely different offense than what everyone else in college football runs. And I don't even blame Navy for running the triple option. They cannot recruit the same players from a physical standpoint. Like, their offensive linemen can't just be 320 pounds because they also have to serve in the military. And you don't really see that many 320-pound men in active duty. So there's that. There's the injury aspect. And we also have to recognize the fact that there really is no benefit for Notre Dame to beat Navy, even when Navy is good. I got this question from Austin Moore, 3909, who said, is this a lose-lose game / series for the Irish? Because if they win big, is the narrative just going to be it's just Navy? Or if they win a close game or happen to lose, this team won't be considered college football playoff caliber at all, and nobody will give any credit to Navy. I totally agree with Austin Moore on this front. Think back to 2019. Notre Dame played Navy. They were both ranked. It was the last time that they were both ranked, and prior to that, the last time they played each other as ranked opponents was 1978, so it rarely ever happens. And going into 2019, everyone was betting on Navy. Everyone was picking Navy not only to cover, but to win outright, and it's already starting again this year because they were good. They were going to go end up winning 10 games that season. They were going into Notre Dame Stadium. There was the familiarity. Notre Dame had not really looked good at that point on the year. They already had a couple bad losses, and Notre Dame absolutely ran them off the field. They were up 38-3 at halftime. They won that game 52-20. And guess who didn't talk about Navy after that? Everyone. And was that considered a good win for Notre Dame that season? No, because it was Navy. So yeah, it's absolutely a lose-lose on the field because if Notre Dame wins, it does not benefit their strength of schedule in the college football playoff discussion. Even this year, when people are all high on Navy, it won't matter because the reputation of Navy's football program is going to outweigh their record. And then when Notre Dame beats them, if they were to beat them, I should say, they'll just say, oh, well, Navy, they just beat up on some bad teams. That doesn't really go anywhere for Notre Dame because look at all these SEC teams with 2 or 3 losses, so on and so forth. If they lose, though, if Notre Dame loses to Navy, no matter what the circumstances are, the season is a disaster. It is much worse for them to lose than it is positive for them to win, if you get my point here. And when Notre Dame is fully independent, I think the obligation of playing Navy on an annual basis is not really a big obstacle to their strength of schedule because they had a lot more freedom back then. But that's not the case anymore. They are obligated to play 5 ACC games a year, plus Navy, plus USC, and I don't want that rivalry going away anytime soon, despite what Lincoln Riley might want. And they also have Stanford, but they don't get to play Michigan anymore. They don't really get to play Michigan State very often, and those 2 games have been much more fun to watch over the course of the past couple of decades, and I would love for that Michigan rivalry to come back. So when you look at the football program today, making the playoffs should be the number one goal for this team every single year. And not only does the Navy game not help their cause, it's actively hurting it because players get hurt and it impacts their strength of schedule negatively every single year. And to be clear, I have great respect to everyone who served in the military. My dad, my 2 uncles, my grandpa, my great-grandpas, they all served in the United States military. So it has nothing to do with that whatsoever. But at this point, with the way that college football has changed, I think it's time to revisit the rivalry. And I'm not a person who likes to complain about things without presenting solutions. So how about this? Why can't Notre Dame play Navy once every 3 years? That way, every person who plays for Notre Dame and Navy gets to take part in the rivalry, and they could do it at cool neutral sites like they did last year in Dublin, or they could just play it at Notre Dame Stadium every single time because Notre Dame doesn't even play at Navy ever. They don't even have enough mutual respect to play at their own facility because it's too small. They only have 34,000 people, so instead they've got to play at random NFL stadiums across the country. So by doing this, you keep the tradition alive, but Notre Dame gives themselves a little bit more freedom to schedule better opponents and tougher schedules that are more suitable to making the college football playoff. It also prevents you from playing a noon game in an NFL stadium that's probably not going to have nearly as much juice as any other ranked matchup would. That's just how I feel. I'm sure there are some of you that hate what I just said, and there's probably some of you that totally agree, and that's just the nature of it. If you don't agree with anything I said and you want them to play every single year, the good thing for you is you are going to get what you want. I don't think this rivalry is going anywhere unless Notre Dame were to join the Big Ten, which could certainly happen here in the next few years. Who knows what's going to happen in college football? But before you come at me, just think about it. They get to play once every 3 years. It doesn't just go away. I understand and I respect the history. And if you're saying Notre Dame would not be here without Navy, I agree. Notre Dame would not be here if not for Navy, so they owed them a debt. But that debt has been paid 1,000,000 times over. And I've made this analogy before. But the United States would not have won the War of Independence if not for France. The French provided supplies. They supplied arms, ammunition, and most importantly, men to fight against the British. Do you feel indebted to France? Do you? When you see a French person walking down the street, do you say thank you? I doubt it. Do you feel an obligation to visit France and thank them for their service and the fact that the United States even exists today? Because without them, they're not beating the British. And you'd be speaking the Queens. You'd be calling your buddies blokes. And let's just be honest, your teeth would probably be a little bit worse. Okay? I know it might sound ridiculous, and I am kidding a little bit, but my point is that debts can be paid, and you're not bound for eternity. I think Notre Dame should continue playing Navy. Tradition is what makes college football great, and I don't want this tradition to go away entirely. I just want it to be modified so that it makes sense with the modern age of college football. Let me know how you feel in the comments. I'm sure that this one is going to generate a pretty strong reaction. But now let's get back to this team. Is there a new frontrunner to be the starting quarterback in 2025? That's next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by ZBiotics. ZBiotics Pre Alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Here's how to use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol, and for best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly, pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. Today's episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on PrizePicks. Personally, I love PrizePicks because I'm able to play out here in California, so it is definitely my favorite, and you can download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, Jude Smith chimed in on the Navy game, said great tradition, but a high risk of injury to Notre Dame players, and then he just moves on to next season. He says that he's not sold on Steve Angeli, but Kenny Minchey looks like a good mobile quarterback who could make big plays. But he says CJ Carr is probably the most likely starter, so what is he missing? Jude, if this is a pitch for Kenny Minchey to start, I get it. I certainly am not rolling it out. It is my understanding that Steve Angeli understands the quarterback situation at Notre Dame, and he's realistic. I think he really just wants the opportunity to start one season at Notre Dame, with that season most likely being next year. But the coaching staff is going to have a very honest conversation with all of the quarterbacks after the season. My guess is that by this point, after preseason camp and after practicing throughout this year, they probably have a good sense of the direction they want to go next season. So they're going to have to talk with Steve Angeli and be real with him, Kenny Minchey, and CJ Carr. There's probably going to be an odd guy out. I highly doubt Angeli, Minchey, and Carr are all on the team next season. So my guess is that Steve Angeli is going to transfer because the coaching staff is going to leave it to Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr to have a very real quarterback battle that will start in the spring and that will probably carry over into preseason camp. I think both Minchey and Carr are incredibly talented, and they are the future of this program. However, if the staff believes that Steve Angeli gives them the best chance to succeed next season, if they think that maybe Kenny Minchey isn't ready and CJ Carr is still too inexperienced to start as a redshirt freshman, I could see them allowing Steve Angeli to compete in that quarterback competition, knowing that that could lead to the eventual transfer of Kenny Minchey and or CJ Carr. Again, I'm just throwing out different options here. I'm not presenting what I think is going to happen because ultimately nothing is going to shock me. I think I would be surprised if CJ Carr left after this year, but I wouldn't be like completely blown away because this is college football, man, and everybody can transfer. If you don't believe me, Caleb Downs is a freshman All-American at Alabama, and he transferred to Ohio State. And I understand there was a coaching change that led to that, but still, star players at programs who, like Alabama, they've had so many great defensive backs through the years, for him to leave and go to Ohio State after 1 year is crazy, even though Nick Saban left, because, even though Alabama has 2 losses on the year, that's still a good team, still a good program, and he was out the door before they even had a chance to hire anyone. Like, it wasn't like Kalen DeBoer was going to come back and keep him around. It Downs was out the door, and I think you see that more and more. Like at one point, Walker Howard, if you remember that name, he was a 5-star quarterback out of high school, and Notre Dame was trying to get him late in the process, actually in the same class as Steve Angeli. He stayed committed to LSU. He was at LSU for 1 year and then decided he wanted to leave to go to Ole Miss, and he hasn't even really played for them. So at one point, he was the quarterback of the future at LSU. It didn't happen, and now he's at Ole Miss, and who knows what's going to happen. I don't think CJ Carr is going to transfer. My point is that, like, look, man, it's college football. It's the quarterback position in the transfer portal era. Anything can happen. So I could totally see Kenny Minchey being the starting quarterback next year. I could totally see Notre Dame saying, hey, we need to go with CJ Carr. I've heard some good things when he was healthy. He was tearing it up on the scout team. He was dealing with that elbow injury. It looks like he's back, dressed, and ready to go. So it's definitely going to be something to follow. I think that Notre Dame is going to have to start those conversations probably during the second bye week, which is after this weekend. Like, the coaching staff is going to go on the road to recruit, but that's kind of the point in the season where you have to start looking around not only at your own roster, but who might be in the transfer portal, because as we know, it's approaching quickly. And if you're left waiting for the portal to open up, and then that's when you're going to make all your moves, you're already way behind, because all these things are happening behind the scenes. And I'm sure that the Notre Dame coaching staff is going to be prepared. All right, next one. McBride 7. Considering Mitchell Evans is not having the best season, any chance he returns next year? Yeah, I mean, Mitchell Evans has a year left of eligibility, so he could come back, and at this point, I expect that he will. I think it's safe to say that this season has been a disappointment for Mitchell Evans, even though we all understand that he's coming back from a very significant injury, and that our expectations for Mitchell Evans going into this year were probably a little bit too high given the nature of his injury and the time in which he suffered it, because he actually hurt it in the 7th game last year against Purdue. So it's basically against Pittsburgh, It has been a full year removed since that knee surgery. So far this season, through 7 games, 14 receptions, 108 receiving yards, 0 touchdowns. Through 7 games last season, he had 29 catches, 422 yards, and a touchdown. So it's really unfortunate for him, because I think we're all expecting a big year for Mitchell Evans, and then him to take his talents to the NFL, because I think he's going to be a great NFL tight end, has the frame, has the speed, has the catching ability. He can also block as well. And I thought he would be one of the best weapons on the entire offense. But up to this point, he's made some contested catches early on in the season, played a little bit against Texas A&M, had a couple nice catches against Northern Illinois, actually. But he's honestly been most effective as a decoy as of late, because defenses are still so focused on him on third downs. And if you look back at that throwback screen that Notre Dame ran against Louisville, that was set up because they ran an RPO, and 2 guys went with Mitchell Evans as he was crossing the field, and then Riley Leonard turned and then dropped the ball over the defense on the weak side of the field, and then he just had an open lane to score. So he's still an asset. He's still a weapon for this team, and I liked what I saw from him last week. He played 51 snaps, which is the most he's played all year, had 4 catches, but he just didn't seem like he has the same burst. Like, I thought that screen that Notre Dame ran to him was going to be a surefire touchdown. He had an open lane, but then he got hawked by a Georgia Tech defender. So hopefully he gets healthy. He has a strong finish to this year, because Notre Dame still absolutely needs him this season, and then he comes back fully healthy and ready to go in 2025. Next up, Dermot Hannon. Who on the current roster is the best chance to win the Heisman in the future? It's got to be Jeremiah Love, right? And he's still a long shot, but I think he has the best chance of anyone on this team. The only issue, though, is he plays running back, and it's basically a quarterback award at this point. Although Ashton Jeanty, the running back for Boise State, certainly has a good chance to win the Heisman this year. I just don't think that Jeremiah Love gets the ball enough in this Notre Dame offense to put up the type of numbers necessary to win the Heisman. I do think Notre Dame is going to have a better offensive line next year, and Jeremiah Love is going to be better with another year of experience. But let's look at his stats on the year. He's had 77 carries for 462 yards. That's 6 yards per carry. He's had 7 rushing touchdowns. He's also added 15 receptions for 149 yards and another receiving touchdown. What's most impressive to me is he's forced 48 missed tackles on the year with the ball in his hands, which is a staggering number. But those are good numbers, and then you've got Ashton Jeanty numbers. He has already put up stats that would basically quantify as a great season, and he has only played in 6 games. Let's look at it. 1,248 rushing yards, 17 rushing touchdowns, 9.9 yards per carry. He's basically averaging a first down every time he gets the ball handed to him. Plus, he has another receiving touchdown as well. So he has 18 total touchdowns on the year. And yeah, obviously, Ashton Jeanty is playing against worse competition. He is the entire Boise State offense, but still, Love isn't anywhere close to that. And I think you need to be much closer to that than where Love is at right now to be anywhere near the Heisman conversation as a running back. But For the record, I am not saying that Notre Dame should give Love the same amount of touches as Genty because they don't have to, but in order to win the Heisman, you're going to have to put up much bigger numbers than Love has this year, even though he's been great, and I think he's going to be even better next year. All right, ND today. Riley Mills, the last 2 games compared to the first 5 have been drastically different. Do you think the return of Rubio/Cross getting healthy has anything to do with this, or does it have more to do with the opponents? Well, I think the help of Gabriel Rubio and Howard Cross has everything to do with it because Georgia Tech has a good offensive line, very experienced, and he was dominant in that game. The most snaps that Riley Mills played all year was against Northern Illinois. He played 58 in that game, and that was his worst game of the season. I don't think that's a coincidence. Played 48 against Georgia Tech alongside a healthier Howard Cross and Gabriel Rubio and had his best game of the year. But really, from the Miami-Ohio game on, he's been really good and getting better each week. Like, the Miami-Ohio game wasn't great, but then that Louisville game, he got his first sack of the season, then he added another one against Stanford, and then he got 2 against Georgia Tech. And on top of that, he has 7 total quarterback hurries and 5 run stops over the past 2 games. He's just playing really well right now. Having Howard Cross right next to him helps out a lot because the defense has to take him into account. They just can't run double teams to either one of those guys, or if they are going to send a double team, it's probably going to Howard Cross, which opens things up for Riley Mills. But I just think the added rest with Gabriel Rubio being out there too has helped, and he's just playing with more of a fire. Like, there were times at the beginning of the season where it almost looked like he was loafing, but I just think he was tired out there. And also, it's just on him. He's playing better. Last year, it took him a little while to get going, but then he was really effective in the second half. And if he's able to continue this trend, he is going to be dominant in the second half of the season. And Notre Dame really needs him against Navy because you need to dominate the interior. That was one of my keys to the game for the Notre Dame defense. So if Riley Mills is another really disruptive game, that would bode very well for the Irish against the midshipmen. Coming up next, which high school programs would you most want Notre Dame to create a pipeline to? I'm thinking a couple out here in California, plus 1 in Northeast Ohio. More on that right after this. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And if you're looking for something to bet on with that first $5 bet, we've got another one for you. I'm going to be honest, I gave out the Vikings -3 all week on the show, but that game is actually going on at the time that I'm recording this. Right now, the Rams are actually winning the game at 21-20, so we're going to need the Vikings to get in the end zone here shortly in the fourth quarter. But for this week, this Sunday, we're going to look ahead. I know this sounds crazy. I am taking the Browns +9 against the Baltimore Ravens. The Browns have been terrible. They've been one of the worst teams in football this year. However, Deshaun Watson is not going to be the starting quarterback. It's going to be Jameis Winston. I think that this team is going to be galvanized without Watson on the field and that just black cloud hanging over the entire franchise. I think they're going to come out with more passion and with more of a fire than they have in weeks. Don't think they're going to win, but I do think they're going to cover. +9 is a lot of points. And for more, just visit FanDuel.com today. All right, let's wrap it up here with a few quick ones. This one comes from Ricardo Caliente. Our high school recruiting class seems like the Duncan Hall class of 2029. Notre Dame Academy, Berkeley Prep, St. Joseph's Prep, Brunswick School, Woodward Academy. What 5 players would you love to see a Notre Dame player from? I admit, I don't love that Notre Dame is a pipeline with the Brunswick School in Greenwich, Connecticut. No disrespect to Brunswick School, but I lived in Connecticut. Not the best high school football there. It's no Ohio. It's no Texas. It's no California. It's no Georgia. It's no Alabama. It's no Florida. It's none of that. I'm sure there are good players from Brunswick School, and Notre Dame landed a few of them. But I'd like to see Notre Dame land some players from some bigger, more football-focused schools around the country that are going up against some of the best competition in high school football. So I'm going to go with Fenwick High School, Bennett Academy, Loyola. No, I'm just kidding. Those are basically feeder schools to Notre Dame because even though Notre Dame doesn't take a ton of kids in-state in Indiana, their real in-state is just the Chicago Catholic high school system and Fenwick, Bennett, and Loyola. I can't even tell you how many kids I met from those 3 schools when I was at Notre Dame. But my real answer, my real top 5, I would go Mater Dei and St. John Bosco, number 1 and 2. They're the number 1 and 2 ranked teams in the entire country right now. And actually, as a matter of fact, on today, Mater Dei is going to face off St. John Bosco in an awesome high school matchup. It's going to be on TV. There's a bunch of future D1 guys. So always exciting to watch that game. And then I'm going to go with IMG Academy, which I guess is barely a high school, but it is, in Bradenton, Florida. I'm going to go with Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I'm going to round out my top 5. I got to go with an Ohio school, right? Got to rep Cleveland a little bit here. So we're going to go with St. Edwards in Northeast Ohio. I actually grew up rooting for St. Ignatius, which is the rival of St. Edwards. And at the time, St. Ignatius was winning a lot more than St. Edwards, but that has flipped mightily over the past decade plus. St. Edwards is the powerhouse in not just Northeast Ohio, but all of Ohio. So that's my top 5. Mater Dei, St. John Bosco, IMG Academy, Bishop Gorman, and St. Edwards. These 5 schools are barely even high schools. They're like football feeder programs. There's so many great players that go through those schools. So if Notre Dame can start landing more players from them, they're going to be in a lot better shape going forward. Okay, next question comes from Jared McIntosh. Favorite Shamrock Series uniform? He says it's got to be the Yankee Stadium pinstripes. Jared, what are we doing? I think those might be my least favorite by far. And not just because they look like the Yankees. I just think they look ugly. But hey, Jared, you're entitled to your own opinion. I'm guessing you're a Yankees fan. Congrats on the World Series, all of that. I'm still not bitter about that. I'll let you know when I'm over it. I will admit, though, about the Shamrock Series uniforms that year, I went to that game. They were not as ugly in person, which is about the nicest thing I can say about those uniforms. I actually really like this year's, to be honest. I think it's a cool blue and gold combination. I think the numbers are a little bit weird, but I like everything else about the uniforms this year. Excited to see those in action, but I think my all-time favorite Shamrock Series uniforms are the ones they wore in the Vegas game against BYU. That's right, Catholics versus Mormons in the Sin City. Never gets old, but I loved it. It was like the white and gold. They kept the helmets the same. I thought that was a really clean look and a good win for the Irish. I'm still kicking myself for not making the trip to Vegas for that one because it looked like an absolutely awesome time. All right, last one here because we went pretty long in segments 1 and 2. Mike Patterson, 9351. Hey, Tyler, love the show. Daily Watcher. Thank you, Mike. I was hoping you could give my son's 8th grade football team a shout out. His name is Z Patterson, and his team just finished their season last night. Chippewa Falls Cardinals Red 8th grade finished 6-1. Go Irish. Z, shout out to you, brother, and the rest of your teammates. Congrats on the 6-1 season. That is a good record. I believe Chippewa Falls is in Wisconsin, right? So there's some good football out there in Wisconsin. So a 6-1 record. That's good, man. I can tell you my 8th grade team was not nearly as good as that. My 7th grade team, we did make it to the championship. We lost. I still think about those days today, man. That was a ton of fun, and enjoy it, and good luck if you are going to play high school football. It's going to be the best time of your life. Enjoy it, and congrats again on the 6-1 record. That's awesome, man. Shout out to you in the Chippewa Falls Cardinals Red 8th grade team. That is going to do it for today's episode, though, and that is another week of Locked On Irish in the books. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. I'm going to be back on Monday morning because I am traveling to Louisville for a wedding this weekend, so I'm not going to be able to record until I get back to LA on Sunday night. However, Joe George, the guest on yesterday's show, is going to go live immediately after the game over on the Locked On Chicago YouTube feed. Plus, he's going to upload the audio of that postgame show on the Locked On Irish podcast feed. So be sure to check that out if you want an instant reaction. Otherwise, I'll see you on Monday. And remember, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to podcasts if you have not already. And go Irish.